Few international conflicts in recent memory have triggered social and political cleavages in American society, putting our liberal values and our capacity for tolerance to the test. These formative periods shaped their respective generations, giving rise to their own forms of McCarthyism, protest movements, and political dissent. Among them were the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the War on Terror, and now Gaza. This week, 2 more U.S. officials resigned over the Gaza war, accusing the Biden administration of not being transparent about the Israeli obstruction of humanitarian aid to the more than 2 million starving Palestinians trapped inside the tiny strip. That brings the total number of American officials that have publicly resigned to 9, one of whom was a member of the U.S. Air Force who set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington as he shouted, "Free Palestine." And according to one of our next guests, at least 24 more officials have left the Biden administration quietly. On Tuesday, Stacey Gilbert, a senior State Department official from the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, resigned in protest of a May report delivered to Congress that concluded that Israel is not blocking humanitarian aid deliveries to the Gaza Strip. I spoke with her on TV last night. She accused the Biden administration of twisting the facts for political reasons and said she is convinced that Israel is violating international humanitarian law. Gilbert is a 20-year veteran of the State Department. She resigned after concluding that it was futile to continue working on Gaza from within the government. Also resigning on Tuesday was Alexander Smith, a contractor for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID for short. Smith stepped down after his internal presentation on maternal and child mortality among Palestinians was abruptly canceled. In the days before it was canceled, Smith was told to make several redactions, including removing a slide referring to international humanitarian law and deleting any language suggesting recognition of a Palestinian state. Smith says after his presentation was canceled, he faced the ultimatum of resignation or dismissal, and he chose to speak out. In his resignation letter to the agency's head, Samantha Power, Smith expressed frustration with USAID's treatment of Palestinians, writing, quote, "I cannot do my job in an environment in which specific people cannot be acknowledged as fully human, or where gender and human rights principles apply to some, but not to others, depending on their race," end quote. 2 other Biden administration officials who resigned since the war in Gaza began are Lily Greenberg Call and Josh Paul, and they join me today. Greenberg Call, appointed by President Biden to the U.S. Interior Department, cited the president's endorsement of genocide. Paul resigned 10 days after Hamas launched its October 7th attack, becoming the first publicly known resignation. He cited Washington's blind support for Israel. Lily Greenberg Call and Josh Paul both join me now. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Lily, let me start with you, because if anybody wants to hear it in your words, you've written this out. You've appeared at numerous times in the media, but you've written out in an op-ed why you came to the conclusion you came to. Tell me why you did.
So as an American Jew, I come from communities that are impacted by this war. And I felt that, the president is really using the language of Jewish safety in particular to justify a genocide of Palestinians where over 35,000 people, 15,000 of them are killed. And I could no longer serve at the pleasure of a president who is doing that, and using my community to justify that. And it doesn't make us safer, and it certainly doesn't make Palestinians safe.
But it doesn't. You are aware of the tensions and the idea that there is rising anti-Semitism. You can hold both of these thoughts in your mind.
Absolutely. And there is rising anti-Semitism. I am terrified of that. There's also rising anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. And we know that those things are happening because of the continued U.S.-backed assault on Palestinians. Jewish safety and Palestinian freedom are not oppositional to each other. And if anything, I don't want to leave my Jewishness at the door when it comes to thinking about Israel. It goes against all the Jewish values I was raised with, to kill people, to starve them, to make people refugees. These things are actually counter to what it means to be Jewish. And I know that, and there's plenty of other people within my community that do. According to recent polling that was released this last week, over half of American Jews support Biden's proposal to halt weapons transfers to Israel if there's an invasion of Rafah. There is an invasion of Rafah. There's been multiple strikes with U.S. weapons. That's been confirmed by multiple outlets. Israeli tanks are rolling through central Rafah. Bibi's calling Biden's bluff, and it's time for him to listen to the majority of people within the administration, the majority of the American people, and the majority of American Jews.
Josh, you left early. In the hopes that it would send a real signal, I assume, to the administration to rethink their strategy. Since then, others have left. A criticism has grown about the administration's position on Israel. Talk to me about when you do things like this, when you and Lily do the things you do, you hope for some change, and you hope to see that change occur in a timely manner. Have you seen change? Are you seeing something happening now with the administration, or are you still as frustrated as you were when you left?
Well, I left because it was very clear already 10 days into this conflict that the bombs that we were providing to Israel were being used to violate international law. And this has remained ever since then a competition between the facts and the politics. And the experts within government who have resigned, some publicly, some not publicly, the experts in government who continue to push from the inside are on the side of the facts. Unfortunately, the politics have not shifted. But when I resigned, I did so in part because I could not be a part of authorizing the transfers of these arms that have killed so many thousands of innocents, but also because I felt that U.S. support, military support, was an issue worthy of debate. And that debate has not been happening inside of government. So I felt it was important that that debate has happened or happened in society. And there I'm pleased and proud to say that it has indeed, from college campuses to government being a major topic of debate, and indeed in the international sphere as well.
Lily, let's talk about you were a big supporter of this administration. I don't know whether you still are, but the point is you politically support them. You're a Democrat. There are some who argue that leaving hurts the administration, and that the consequence is that if it strengthens Donald Trump, that's even going to be worse for whatever it is you're concerned about. Tell me how you think this through.
I'm absolutely terrified of a Trump presidency, which is why I worked on the campaign in 2020. It's why I worked for the administration. And it's why I, for months, and many others, have been pushing the president to stop this disastrous policy that is not only killing thousands of Palestinians, but alienating voters here in the United States. It's alienating staff like myself who worked for the president. It's alienating young voters, people. I organized college students in Arizona in 2020. These people, turned out their peers on campus for Biden, volunteers who spent 40 hours a week in the months leading up to the election. And so it's up to the president to prevent another Trump presidency. And he can do that if he actually enforces this deal and stops sending weapons to Israel.
Well, let's talk about that. First of all, this deal, Josh, that's on the table right now. It was surprising to some of us that Joe Biden made this an announcement from the White House, because there have been sort of deals that have looked like they've come close and haven't happened. So it made some of us think, if Joe Biden is going to do this from the White House, there must be something behind it. And I was speaking to Aaron David Miller yesterday, who said, it's not immaculate conception. For the president to say that there's a possible workable deal means that there's a lot of pressure going on in the background to make it happen. I'd like your evaluation on this.
So first of all, I think we should welcome any deal that leads to a ceasefire, leads to a cessation of the killing, and expands significantly the inflow of humanitarian assistance that is desperately needed. However, I have two concerns. The first is that I'm not sure, to put it mildly, that we actually have a good faith partner in the Israeli government and in the Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, who, of course, his personal interest does not align with that of President Biden. And I don't know whether it will be a matter of days or weeks or months, but one can easily see how Prime Minister Netanyahu might ultimately find it in his interest to sabotage this deal. So that is one thing we have to keep an eye on. The other thing is that this deal does nothing to ultimately advance Palestinian self-determination. And it is the absence of that self-determination, it is the Israeli occupation that is the root cause of the conflict here. And so I would hate to see a deal that just doesn't advance and gets us, essentially leaves us in several months where we were a year ago, albeit with Gaza that much more devastated and the Palestinian people in that much more of a desperate situation. I think the other question to ask is why it has taken so long. As you said, the parameters here are not new. This is not something that has not been floated before. Why has it taken so many months for President Biden to come to this deal and to announce this and to push Israel on it?
But that's your point, Lily, right? That there have been options. America has had options all along in being able to pressure Israel to do more, and hasn't. And I'm curious about this because it sounded like on October 8th, it sounded like Joe Biden had sent a warning to Israel to say, don't do the wrong thing here. Don't do what we did in Afghanistan and get ourselves stuck in a long, protracted war. What do you think happened? Why was it so difficult for this administration to even get to the point that we're at this week?
You know, unfortunately, I can't speak for administration leadership because I, just like you and just like so many people across the country, have been very confused about this very question because it has been clear that they are not listening to their colleagues who are, you know, subject matter experts who've been hired to work on this, but also the majority of the American people. And the cost has been tens of thousands of Palestinian lives.
So what does success look like? If everybody gets the message now that something different should happen, what does that look like to you?
It's a lasting ceasefire. It's to stop sending weapons to Israel. It's a hostage exchange, you know, of both Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. And it's the United States using the immense leverage that we do have here to push for a lasting change to the status quo. As Josh said, you know, self-determination for Palestinians and Israelis, a thriving future for Palestinians and Israelis. And the only way that that's going to happen is if there's Palestinian freedom. Because, like I said, Palestinian freedom and Jewish safety are not at odds with each other. Our futures are intertwined, and there is not going to be one without the other. And
Josh, do you think in the effort to get this deal done that Joe Biden is going to use that leverage, the leverage that we all believe he has, the ability to say, I mean, he did it sort of for about 10 minutes, right? He said, we're going to stop one shipment of weaponry, but then announced that they were restarting shipments of weaponry. So it feels like he knows he can go there. What's he looking for? What's he waiting for to actually say America can have a remarkable impact on stopping this war?
Well, I think he knows that the leverage is there, as you said, both in terms of arms transfers and security assistance, also in terms of the regional diplomacy that we are conducting, and of course the global diplomacy and the protection that we are providing Israel from accountability and at the United Nations. There are all sorts of available tools there that President Biden could use to press Israel. I think we will see if Israel does actually follow through, does commit to this agreement. That will be one thing. To the extent that it begins to undermine it, and in that context, one might wonder why Democratic members of Congress think it is a good idea at this time to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to Congress and to give him that platform to stand up to President Biden. But I think that the tools are there. And if President Biden, I hope he will use them, first of all, now to bring this deal to a close, to bring this conflict to a close, but also, you know, should there be any backsliding.
Thank you to both of you. I appreciate the time you've taken to tell us your stories. Lily Greenberg-Call is a former special assistant to the chief of staff in the U.S. Department of the Interior. Josh Paul is a former official at the United States